You remember the exact moment the silence became louder than the love ever was. The screen that used to light up with their name now feels like a locked door, and every quiet hour stretches longer than the last. You replay conversations trying to decode where warmth turned into distance, how laughter slowly became delayed, replies and how affection somehow transformed into space that never stopped expanding. And what hurts the most is not even the goodbye, because there was no real goodbye, just a slow fade that left your heart mid-sentence. You keep wondering how someone who once held you so close could suddenly act like closeness was the very thing they feared. And deep down you feel it. This isn't the end of the story, because love like that doesn't just disappear, it goes into hiding. And avoidant hearts have a pattern. They run, not because they don't care, but because caring feels like losing control. And right now, while you sit with unanswered questions, they are convincing themselves that distance equals safety. They are telling their mind that freedom feels better than vulnerability. But time has a way of revealing truths pride tries to bury, and one day, maybe when you least expect it, they will show up again, not with the same emotional armor, not with the same certainty, but cracked open by the weight of losing someone who truly saw them. Because avoidant souls don't process love in the moment, they process it in the absence of it, and by then, regret has already started building a home inside their chest. At first, when they pulled away, it felt like relief to them, like finally being able to breathe after emotions became too intense. Avoidants often associate closeness with pressure, expectations, and the subconscious fear of being consumed. So their nervous system tells them that escape equals peace. Even if their heart whispers otherwise, they aren't heartless, they are overwhelmed. They learned somewhere in their past that depending on someone leads to disappointment, that emotional vulnerability equals danger. So when love gets real, their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to create space. They don't leave because you were too much. They leave because feelings became too real for the emotional tools they had. And instead of communicating fear, they retreat into silence, because silence feels safer than exposing uncertainty. What looks like indifference on the outside is often emotional self-protection on the inside. They convince themselves that they are better off alone, that attachment leads to pain, and that independence is strength. But what they don't realize is that emotional suppression doesn't erase connection. It only delays confrontation with it. That delay becomes the very reason they will return later, because emotions buried alive never stay buried. They wait, they grow, they echo in quiet moments. When distractions fade, after leaving, they start building a narrative that helps them avoid guilt. They tell themselves that the relationship was too demanding, that timing wasn't right, that they need to focus on themselves. And while some of that may carry truth, there is also a deeper layer they avoid acknowledging. The fear of being seen too deeply, the discomfort of emotional dependency, or the vulnerability of mutual love. They replay moments where closeness felt overwhelming, rather than moments where connection felt healing. This mental editing helps them cope with the separation. It protects their ego from feeling like the one who walked away from something meaningful. But denial has an expiration date, and reality slowly slips through the cracks of their logic. They may distract themselves with work, social circles, temporary connections, or hobbies that fill their time, but never quite fill their heart. They scroll through memories more often than they admit. They reread old messages, searching for reassurance that they were once loved deeply, even if they couldn't fully receive it then. And the more they try to convince themselves they made the right decision, the more their subconscious starts asking questions they can't easily silence. Because the truth is, you represented emotional safety they rarely experience. And that kind of connection is not easily replaceable. Avoidants are known for delayed emotional processing, meaning they don't feel the full impact of loss immediately. While you were grieving in real time, they were operating in emotional survival mode. Their brain prioritized stability over reflection. But as weeks pass and life settles into routine, the distractions lose their effectiveness. And that's when emotions they avoided begin resurfacing. It often happens during ordinary moments, driving alone, lying awake at night, hearing a familiar song, or walking past a place that holds shared memories. The absence becomes undeniable, and what once felt like freedom now starts feeling like emptiness. This is when the emotional realization begins. They start understanding understanding that running didn't eliminate attachment, it only postponed heartbreak. And the heartbreak hits differently for avoidants because it challenges the identity they built around independence. Admitting they miss you feels like admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability has always been their greatest fear. But emotions don't negotiate with pride. They surface anyway, slowly turning curiosity into nostalgia, and nostalgia into regret. Reality has a way of humbling even the most emotionally guarded heart. The moment they truly feel your absence is rarely dramatic. It's subtle yet powerful. They notice no one else listens the way you did. No one else understood their silence without demanding explanations. No one else offered patience without pressure. And this comparison isn't something they consciously plan. It naturally unfolds as they interact with others. They begin recognizing the emotional depth they took for granted, the safety they didn't know how to appreciate at the time, and the love that asked for nothing but honest distractions start feeling temporary while memories feel permanent. They realize that what they left behind wasn't suffocating, it was supportive, and that awareness triggers a wave of regret they can't easily escape. They may try reaching out to friends for validation, but deep down, they know certain emotional connections can't be replaced by casual conversations. This realization breaks through their emotional defenses, creating cracks in the walls they built around their heart. And once those cracks appear, emotions they suppressed begin flooding back. They think about conversations they avoided, apologies they never offered, and vulnerability they weren't ready to express. And for the first time, they don't blame circumstances or timing. They start seeing their role in the distance that formed. And accountability is a heavy realization for someone who has spent years associating independence with emotional control. As regret grows stronger, their ego and heart begin an internal battle. Pride tells them to maintain distance, to avoid appearing weak, to protect the identity they create. But their heart whispers memories of connection, laughter, emotional safety and understanding that felt rare and irreplaceable. Avoidants struggle deeply with this internal conflict because reaching out requires admitting they were wrong, acknowledging they hurt someone they cared about, and risking rejection. Their ego fears humiliation, while their heart longs for reconnection. This emotional tug-of-war can last for weeks or even months. They type messages they never send. They check your social presence without interacting. They wonder if you've moved on. And the possibility of losing you permanently becomes more painful than the vulnerability required to reach out. They start realizing that emotional control without connection feels empty, and that independence without intimacy lacks warmth. The same silence they once desired now feels heavy, and the same distance they created now feels lonely. Their pride slowly loses its grip as their heart grows louder, and eventually the emotional truth becomes impossible to ignore. They didn't leave because they didn't care. They left because caring scared them. And now they understand that fear cost them someone who loved them genuinely. This realization humbles them, softens them, and prepares them for the moment they will show up again, not as the emotionally distant person who walked away, but as someone carrying the weight of emotional clarity and the vulnerability they once tried to avoid. And while you've been healing, rediscovering your worth, and learning to find peace within yourself, they have been fighting an internal battle between who they were and who they needed to become to appreciate what they lost. And the truth is, avoidant hearts rarely return unchanged. The journey of absence reshapes them, because losing someone who offered emotional safety forces reflection. They can't escape, and when they finally gather the courage to reach out, it won't come from a place of convenience. It will come from emotional surrender, the understanding that love is not a threat to independence, but a companion to growth. And as you listen to this, remember something deeply important. Their potential return is not proof that you were waiting. It's proof that your presence left an imprint strong enough to challenge their fear. Your love planted a seed of emotional awareness that time and distance could not erase. And whether they come back tomorrow or months from now, one thing remains true. The silence you endured became the mirror that showed them what life feels like without you, and that realization is often the first step toward the regret that brings them back, broken, reflective, and finally ready to face the emotions they once ran from. And in this unfolding story, your strength, patience, and emotional depth were never wasted. They were the lesson their heart needed to learn what love truly means. And as their emotional walls begin to crack, something unexpected starts happening inside them. A quiet war unfolds between the version of themselves that always chose distance and the version that now craves connection. Their ego steps in first, reminding them why they left, replaying every moment they felt overwhelmed. Every time closeness felt like pressure, every vulnerability that made their chest tighten, the ego tries to protect them from shame, from the possibility that they might have been the one who caused the loss. Because admitting that feels like standing unarmed in front of their own reflection. But the heart is persistent. It doesn't argue with logic. It speaks through memory, through emotion, through the undeniable pull they still feel when your presence crosses their mind, and suddenly they are caught in this loop where pride says stay away, but longing says go back. They start questioning their past decisions, wondering if independence really brought them peace or if it simply numbed them temporarily. They notice how their achievements, their distractions, their social interactions all feel slightly incomplete, like something essential is missing, and that missing piece always leads back to you. They may try to convince themselves that reaching out would disrupt your healing, but deep down they know the real reason is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of accountability, fear of hearing that you no longer care the way you once did. And this fear slowly humbles them, because for someone who always avoided emotional exposure, realizing they might have lost someone irreplaceable becomes heavier than their pride can carry. This is the stage where their ego starts losing control, where emotional truth becomes louder than self-protection. And once that shift begins, it cannot be reversed. Your silence, your absence, your decision to stop chasing them becomes the loudest message they never expected to hear. Because when you stopped reaching out, they lost the reassurance that you would always be there. They were used to emotional safety being available without effort. They subconsciously believed they could return whenever they felt ready. But your silence disrupted that belief. It forced them to confront uncertainty, and uncertainty is deeply unsettling for avoidant hearts. They begin wondering if you've moved on, if someone else is now experiencing the connection they once had, and this thought triggers a wave of emotions they can no longer suppress. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting the consequences of their actions, and for the first time they truly sit with the discomfort they once avoided. They replay moments where you asked for reassurance, and they withdrew. Moments where you offered vulnerability and they changed the subject. Moments where you needed clarity and they chose distance instead. Regret doesn't arrive as a single emotion. It comes as layers of realization that slowly unfold. They recognize the emotional effort you invested, the patience you showed, the understanding you offered even when you were hurt. And this awareness shifts their perspective entirely. They stop seeing the relationship as something that overwhelmed them and start seeing it as something that supported them in ways they didn't know how to appreciate at the time. Your silence becomes the space where their emotional awakening begins, and the more they sit with it, the clearer their feelings become. Memories begin transforming in their mind. Moments they once labeled as pressure now appear as care. Conversations they once avoided now seem like opportunities for deeper understanding they missed. They start romanticizing the emotional safety they felt with you, the way you listened without judgment, the way your presence brought calm to their chaos. Nostalgia has a powerful way of softening defenses. It highlights warmth while fading conflict, and for avoidant hearts, this process becomes the bridge that reconnects them to emotions they tried to suppress. They remember small details, inside jokes, late-night conversations, shared dreams, and the way your support felt steady, even during their moments of distance. These memories don't just bring comfort, they bring realization. They see how rare it is to find someone who loved them without trying to control them, someone who respected their need for space while still offering emotional closeness. And this realization deepens their regret, because they understand now that emotional compatibility like that doesn't come easily. Loneliness is something they thought they were prepared for. After all, they valued independence. They convinced themselves they didn't need need anyone to feel complete. But emotional independence feels very different when it turns into emotional isolation. They begin noticing the absence of meaningful conversations, the lack of emotional intimacy, the quietness that once felt peaceful now feels heavy. They may spend more time on their phone hoping for distractions, more time with acquaintances who never quite understand them the way you did, and slowly they admit to themselves that being alone isn't the same as being at peace. They miss the comfort of knowing someone genuinely cared about their inner world, someone who noticed subtle changes in their mood, someone who created a space where they didn't have to pretend to be unaffected. This loneliness doesn't just make them miss humans, it makes them reevaluate their beliefs about relationships. They start realizing that emotional closeness isn't a threat to independence, it's a complement to it. And this shift in understanding marks the beginning of emotional maturity they didn't have before. Certain moments trigger memories of you more strongly than others. Anniversaries of shared experiences, familiar songs playing unexpectedly, places you once visited together, even scents or random phrases that echo past conversations. These triggers don't ask for permission. Before bringing emotions back to the surface, they appear suddenly, catching them off guard, and each trigger reinforces the emotional bond they tried to escape. Late at night becomes especially challenging. When the world quiets down and distractions fade, their mind replays memories with surprising clarity. They wonder how you're doing, if you still think about them, if you found happiness without them. And this curiosity slowly turns into longing. Longing turns into reflection, and reflection turns into the realization that they never truly stopped caring. They might check your social presence hoping for clues about your life, feeling both relief and sadness when they see you growing. They start imagining conversations they wish they had handled different, apologies they wish they offered sooner, vulnerability they wish they embraced instead of avoiding, and each thought brings them closer to accepting the truth they resisted. They lost someone who mattered deeply, and the weight of that realization changes them. They are no longer running from emotions, they are sitting with them, understanding them, and feeling them fully for the first time. This emotional processing humbles them in ways they never expected, because it forces them to confront the reality that love requires courage, and avoiding vulnerability often leads to deeper pain than facing it ever would have. As this awareness grows, so does their desire to reconnect, but now it's no longer driven by impulse, it's guided by reflection. They don't just miss your presence, they appreciate your value. They understand the emotional safety you offered, and they recognize the strength it took for you to walk away when they couldn't meet you halfway. This understanding transforms their perspective on relationships entirely, as they start seeing vulnerability not as weakness but as a bridge to deeper connection. And this shift prepares them emotionally for the moment they will gather the courage to reach out, because by now they know that silence has taught them more than distance ever could. It showed them what life feels like without the person who once brought emotional depth into their world. And as they sit with this realization, their heart becomes softer, their pride becomes quieter, and their desire to reconnect becomes stronger than their fear of rejection. They begin rehearsing what they might say, how they might express regret without sounding selfish, how they might acknowledge past mistakes without reopening old wounds. This preparation isn't about controlling the outcome anymore, it's about expressing emotional truth. Emotional truth is something avoidants rarely allow themselves to share, but growth changes people in unexpected ways, and by the time they are ready to show up again, they are no longer driven by ego, they are guided by humility. They understand that love is not about control, it's about mutual effort, emotional availability, and the willingness to face discomfort for the sake of connection. And while their return may still carry uncertainty, one thing becomes clear: they are no longer the same person who walked away. They carry emotional awareness shaped by long reflection, and the realization that genuine connection is not easily replaced. And as you continue healing, rediscovering your own strength, remember that their emotional journey does not define your worth. Your value remained constant, whether they recognized it or not. Their regret is not proof that you needed them. It is proof that your presence brought something meaningful into their life, something time and distance could not erase. And whether they return tomorrow or much later, the emotional truth remains. Avoidant hearts often have to lose connection before they understand its value, and when they finally do, they show up differently, not with emotional walls, but with emotional honesty, not with avoidance but with vulnerability, and not with pride but with the quiet hope that it's not too late to reconnect with the person who once made them feel safe enough to be seen. And as this story continues unfolding, know that your healing remains the priority, because whether they come back broken, regretful, and searching for forgiveness or not, you have already proven to yourself that you are capable of loving deeply, surviving loss, and growing stronger through silence. And that emotional strength is something no one can take away from you. It becomes the foundation for every connection you welcome into your life from this moment forward. And somewhere in the quiet evolution of their emotions, regret stops being a passing feeling and becomes a constant presence they can no longer ignore. It shows up in the spaces where distractions used to work, in the pauses between conversations, in the moments when they achieve something good but have no one who truly understands their journey to share it with. And that's when the realization fully settles in. They didn't just lose a relationship, they lost someone who offered emotional safety, someone who saw beyond their defenses, someone who loved them without demanding they become someone else. And this awareness hits deeply because avoidant hearts rarely allow many people close enough to create that kind of bond. They begin comparing every new interaction to what they had with you, not intentionally, but naturally. And no matter how pleasant others may seem, something always feels different. Less grounded, less meaningful, less emotionally aligned. They start understanding that emotional compatibility isn't about constant excitement. It's about feeling understood without over-explaining, accepted without performing, supported without pressure. And when they realize how rare that connection was, regret transforms into grief. Grief for the version of the relationship that could have grown if they had faced their fears instead of running from them. They may not openly express this to anyone around them, but internally they replay scenarios where they wish they had responded differently, communicated more openly, stayed instead of withdrawing. They acknowledge moments when their silence caused confusion, when their distance created insecurity, and when their inability to express vulnerability hurt someone who genuinely cared for them. Accountability becomes unavoidable now, and accountability is often the most humbling stage for someone who once prioritized emotional control. They start recognizing that independence without emotional availability can unintentionally create pain, and this recognition softens them. It reshapes how they view love, not as a threat to their autonomy but as an opportunity for mutual growth. They understand now that being emotionally present doesn't mean losing oneself. It means sharing life with someone who respects individuality while nurturing connection, and this emotional clarity deepens their desire to reach out. But alongside this desire comes fear that you may have moved on, fear that you no longer trust them, fear that their apology might reopen wounds instead of healing them. This fear doesn't stop them, but it slows them down, because for the first time they are considering your feelings as deeply as their own. They hesitate before sending a message. They type words and erase them repeatedly. They wonder how to express regret without sounding self-centered, how to acknowledge pain without expecting immediate forgiveness. And this hesitation reveals emotional growth they didn't have before, because avoidants often struggle with vulnerability, and choosing to reach out despite fear reflects a shift from self-protection to emotional courage. They understand now that reconnecting isn't about reclaiming comfort, it's about facing the consequences of their actions with honesty, and this awareness changes the energy behind their return. They are no longer reaching out to escape loneliness. They are reaching out because they value the connection they once took for granted. And when they finally gather the courage to show up again, it's rarely dramatic. It often begins with something simple, a message asking how you've been, a memory they wanted to share, a quiet acknowledgement that time has brought clarity. These small gestures carry emotional weight because they come from someone who once avoided emotional exposure. And while their words may seem casual on the surface, underneath lies vulnerability they never easily express. They are testing the waters, unsure of how you will respond, prepared for the possibility that you may need distance. And this uncertainty humbles them further. They are no longer in control of the situation. They are stepping into emotional openness without guarantees, and that alone reflects how much they have changed. When they appear broken, it doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it appears as emotional exhaustion, a softness in their tone, a willingness to listen without becoming defensive. Brokenness for an avoidant heart often means their emotional armor has cracked, allowing them to feel emotions they once suppressed. They may express regret for the way they handled things, acknowledge moments they wish they could change, admit fears they never shared before. And this honesty is not easy for them, because it requires confronting parts of themselves they spent years avoiding. They might reveal how their past shaped their reactions, how vulnerability felt unfamiliar, how closeness triggered subconscious fears they didn't fully understand at the time. And as they speak from this place of openness, you may notice a difference in their energy, less guarded, more reflective, more emotionally present. This transformation doesn't mean they have become perfect. It shows they have become aware, and awareness is the foundation of change. They are no longer running from emotions, they are acknowledging them, learning from them, and expressing them with sincerity. And as they share their reflections, they are not asking you to erase the past. They are asking for the opportunity to build something healthier with the emotional tools they have developed. And this is where the distinction between genuine growth and temporary loneliness becomes crucial. Someone returning out of loneliness often focuses on their need for comfort, their fear of being alone, their desire to restore familiarity. But someone returning from growth focuses on accountability, emotional responsibility, and mutual healing. They don't just say they miss you, they explain what they have learned about themselves. They acknowledge the impact of their actions. They express willingness to communicate differently, moving forward. And they respect your boundaries without pressuring you for immediate answers. Genuine growth shows through consistency, through patience, through actions that align with words. They understand now that trust is rebuilt slowly, not demanded instantly. And this understanding reflects emotional maturity they didn't have before. They are no longer driven by the need to control outcomes. They are guided by the desire to nurture connection in a healthier way. And as they stand before you emotionally, more open than ever, you may feel a mixture of emotions: validation, caution, curiosity, relief, maybe even confusion, because the person who once withdrew is now expressing vulnerability. The person who avoided conversations is now initiating them. The person who feared emotional depth is now embracing it. And this shift can feel both reassuring and overwhelming. But remember something important: their return is not a test of your worth. It is a reflection of their emotional journey. Your value remained constant, whether they recognized it before or not. And now, as they express regret, humility, and the desire to reconnect, you hold emotional power you didn't have before, because time apart has strengthened your self-awareness, clarified your boundaries, and deepened your understanding of what you deserve in a relationship. You are no longer waiting for validation, you are evaluating alignment. You are no longer chasing connection, you are observing effort. And this perspective shift allows you to make decisions based on emotional clarity rather than longing. As they stand there broken, regretful, and open-hearted, the choice before you is no longer about proving love, it's about protecting peace. And peace comes from connections that honor mutual effort, emotional safety, and consistent communication. Their vulnerability now is real, their regret is genuine. Their desire to reconnect comes from emotional awakening rather than impulse. And whether this leads to reconciliation or closure, one thing remains undeniable: their journey back to you was shaped by the emotional impact of losing someone who loved them deeply, someone who showed them what connection looks like when it is built on understanding rather than control. And as this chapter unfolds, remember that love does not require you to forget your growth. It invites you to honor it, because the strongest relationships are not formed by avoiding mistakes, they are built by learning from them. And as you listen to their words, observe their actions, and reflect on your own healing, know that whatever decision you make moving forward will come from a place of strength rather than fear, clarity rather than confusion, and self-respect rather than emotional dependence. Because you have already walked through the silence that once felt unbearable, you have already proven to yourself that you can survive loss, rediscover peace, and grow through emotional challenges. And that resilience becomes the foundation for every future connection you choose to nurture, whether it includes them or leads you towards someone new. And as their presence re-enters your life carrying regret, humility, and emotional openness, remember that you are no longer the same person who once feared their absence. You are someone who understands that love is meaningful, but self-worth is essential. And any connection worth rebuilding must honor both equally, because true emotional intimacy is not about begging for another chance. It's about showing through actions that the past has been understood, lessons have been learned, and the future can be shaped with honesty, patience, and mutual respect. And as their voice carries vulnerability you once hoped to hear, your heart now carries wisdom that ensures whatever path you choose will align with the emotional peace you have worked so hard to achieve, reminding you that love should never require losing yourself, and any return worth considering must meet the version of you who has grown stronger through the very silence that once broke your heart. And now you arrive at the moment that once felt impossible to imagine. The decision point where your heart is no longer chasing answers, but evaluating alignment. Because when someone who once walked away returns broken, regretful, and emotionally open, it naturally stirs memories you thought had settled. You may feel the warmth of familiarity blending with the caution your healing has built. And this emotional mixture is completely valid, because love doesn't disappear simply because time has passed. But neither does the memory of how deeply their absence affected you. This is where emotional maturity becomes your anchor. You are no longer looking at their return as proof of your worth. You are looking at it as information about their growth, their accountability, and their willingness to meet you in a space of mutual emotional effort. And this clarity allows you to ask yourself questions you once avoided. Does their presence bring peace or confusion? Do their words align with consistent actions? Do you feel emotionally safe expressing your needs now? These reflections are not about punishing them for the past. They are about honoring the version of you who learned strength through silence, because reconciliation is not about restarting where things left off. It is about deciding whether a new foundation can be built with emotional awareness on both sides, and sometimes the bravest decision is choosing to explore that possibility slowly, allowing trust to rebuild through patience and consistency. And other times the bravest decision is choosing closure, recognizing that love existed but alignment no longer does. Neither choice is wrong when it is guided by self-respect. And as you sit with this decision, you may notice how different your emotional responses are now. You are not reacting from fear of losing them again. You are responding from the confidence that you will be okay regardless of the outcome. This emotional independence is one of the most powerful transformations that came from your journey, because it shifts love from something you cling to into something you consciously choose. Their return becomes an invitation rather than an obligation. And this perspective empowers you to communicate your boundaries clearly, to express what you need moving forward, to observe whether they can meet you in emotional consistency rather than temporary effort. Because genuine change is not proven through promises, it is revealed through behavior over time. And someone who has truly grown understands that trust is rebuilt through patience. They don't rush your healing. They don't pressure you for immediate forgiveness. They respect your pace because they now understand the emotional impact of their past actions. And as they show this patience, you may begin noticing subtle signs of alignment, conversations that feel more open, emotional responses that reflect empathy, a willingness to address discomfort instead of avoiding it. These moments create space for cautious optimism, but it is important to remain grounded in your own emotional truth, because even when someone returns transformed, your healing journey may have taken you in a different direction. Sometimes growth leads two people back together stronger than before, and other times growth reveals that love alone is not enough to sustain compatibility. Both outcomes carry valuable lessons, and either diminishes the authenticity of what you once shared. The lesson their return teaches you goes beyond the relationship itself. It reveals the depth of your emotional resilience, your ability to love without losing yourself, your strength to walk away when emotional needs were unmet, and your capacity to heal without closure. These realizations reshape how you view relationships moving forward. You begin prioritizing emotional availability, communication, and mutual effort rather than potential alone. You understand now that love is not just about chemistry, it is about emotional safety, consistent, and the willingness to face challenges together rather than escaping them. This awareness becomes your compass guiding future connections, ensuring that you choose partners who align with your values and emotional needs. And as you reflect on this journey, you may also develop compassion for their struggles, understanding that avoidance often stems from past wounds rather than intentional harm. This compassion does not excuse their actions, but it allows you to release resentment, freeing your heart from the weight of anger. Forgiveness becomes less about them and more about your own peace, because holding on to bitterness only prolongs emotional attachment, while releasing it creates space for clarity, whether that clarity leads to reconciliation or a final goodbye. And as their presence becomes part of your present again, you may notice moments of vulnerability they never showed before. They speak more openly about their fears, they acknowledge emotional triggers, they express appreciation for your patience. These gestures reflect emotional growth that loss has shaped, because losing someone who provided genuine connection forces self-reflection that comfort never could. And while their regret is sincere, it is important to remember that their emotional journey does not require you to sacrifice your progress. Your healing remains the priority, your boundaries remain valid, your emotional well-being remains essential. Love that aligns with your growth will never ask you to abandon yourself. It will support your individuality while nurturing connection. And as this chapter unfolds, you may find yourself redefining what love means. It is no longer about proving loyalty or waiting for someone to change. It is about choosing relationships that celebrate emotional honesty, mutual respect, and shared effort. This redefinition empowers you to approach their return with curiosity rather than expectation, allowing you to observe whether the connection can evolve into something healthier. And if it can, you move forward with awareness. If it cannot, you step away with gratitude for the lessons learned, because every relationship shapes your understanding of yourself, and self-awareness is one of the most valuable outcomes of emotional experiences. The closing reflection of this journey reminds you of something deeply important. Your worth was never defined by someone's ability to stay. Their avoidance reflected their internal struggles, not your value as a partner. You were always enough. Your love was genuine. Your patience was real, and your emotional depth was a gift. And whether they returned broken and regretful, or remained distant, your growth would still hold the same significance, because the strength you developed through healing becomes part of your identity, influencing how you show up in every aspect of life. You become more selective with your energy, more expressive with your needs, more confident in your decisions. This emotional evolution is something no one can take away from you. And as you look ahead, you realize that love is not something to fear or control. It is something to nurture with awareness and mutual respect. The avoidant who once ran has now faced their emotions, and their return symbolizes the impact genuine connection can have on someone's life. But the most powerful transformation in this story is yours, because you learned to find peace within yourself even when answers were absent. You learned to trust your intuition, to honor your emotions, to prioritize your well-being, and these lessons shape a future where love becomes a choice rooted in self-respect, rather than longing. And as you stand at the end of this emotional chapter, whether you choose to welcome them back or continue forward on your own path, remember that you are no longer the person who once feared their silence. You are someone who understands the power of emotional independence, someone who knows that love should enhance life rather than complicate, someone who recognizes that the right connection will meet you with openness, consistency, and respect. And as their presence becomes a possibility rather than a certainty, your heart remains grounded in the truth that your happiness does not depend on anyone's return. It depends on your ability to honor yourself, your growth, and your emotional needs, because the journey you have walked proves that even when love breaks your heart, it can also build your strength, deepen your understanding, and prepare you for connections that align with your value. And whether their story continues with yours or becomes a meaningful chapter you have outgrown, one thing remains undeniable: you have evolved into someone who knows that true love is not about begging for another chance. It is about choosing each other every day with honesty, vulnerability, and mutual effort. And that understanding ensures that whatever path you take moving forward will be guided by emotional clarity, self-respect, and a quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth was never tied to someone's ability to stay, but always rooted in the love you carry within yourself, a love that remains steady, resilient, and open to the possibilities life continues to unfold.